How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Ganji. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Guys, today is about confessions in crisis. Basically, how Richard Allen aims to undermine his own words by basically utilizing the correction system, his time in, and I hate this term, solitary confinement. So me and Russ today, we're going to kind of give you a breakdown of what solitary confinement is. Notice I'm using quotes. We'll explain that in a bit as well. But it's going to be a good discussion. I believe this could apply very well to the Richard Allen case. It will give you just kind of an idea of what we feel inside the system is what happens, including the possibility that inmates play games. And we'll give you some motivations as to why they would play the game. But we're going to try to keep this fair. I'm going to give out a lot of pros and a lot of cons. Let me go ahead and get Russ. What's up, Russ?
Hey there, Anthony. How's it going?
Good. Russ, you mind introducing yourself, please?
Sure. My name is Russ Hamilton. I am a former and retired sergeant from California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. I am also a former senior juvenile correctional officer. I started my career in San Quentin way back in the 80s, 1989, as a matter of fact. Where my very first actual shift was on death row. I mentioned the senior juvenile officer just to kind of give people, an idea that, even once I was retired, I wanted to continue within corrections and learn more. And then after getting out of juvenile corrections, I went on to work for a private company where we do reentry and rehabilitation work. I am a case manager at the county jail, and I also help out with those case managers that have a client load on the probation side at local county probation department. I am also the founder of Keepers of Chaos, which is a venue dedicated to helping correctional officers in all manner of things, everything from mentoring to training to history, knowledge, fellowship, and that's all on Facebook. And then, of course, I'm also often a roundtable member here on Tier Talk.
Yes, and we love having you. So real quick, just a summary. So basically, during Richard Allen's trial, several key points related to his mental health while incarcerated were discussed. So they said he had a severe mental health decline. Allen exhibited significant mental health deterioration during his time in solitary confinement, and we're going to talk about that term shortly. He experienced suicidal thoughts, severe psychosis, and engaged in alarming behavior such as consuming his own feces and also supposedly drinking from the toilet. Then he made confessions while he was at this facility in solitary confinement. The facility is Westville, and we're talking about Indiana Department of Corrections. They're saying the confessions were under some level of mental health duress. Allen confessed to the murders multiple times during prison phone calls with his wife, saying, "I did it. I killed Abby and Libby." His wife expressed disbelief, suggesting he was delusional. The defense argued these confessions resulted from situational psychosis caused by harsh incarceration conditions. Now, mind you, he didn't just confessed to her. He confessed to the warden. He confessed to the officers. He confessed it to the mental health professional. They talk about inadequate mental health care. Allen's defense team claimed that the Indiana Department of Corrections failed to provide adequate mental health care, prioritizing his status as a safe keeper inmate over following guidelines for inmates with severe mental illness. Allen was held in isolation for 19 months, exceeding the recommended 30-day limit for such conditions. And safekeeping is, I believe it's how they categorize the inmates from A to E. And then basically it goes from like kind of like some level of medication treatment and then group treatment. And then ultimately the harder, the more, the ones that require more vigilance would be the ones that have more individualized treatment. And I believe he was a D. So that kind of put him in individualized treatment. And then you have this, the general impact of solitary confinement. The defense highlighted that Allen's prolonged solitary confinement led to a steep decline in his mental health, including memory loss and an inability to communicate rationally. They argued that these conditions violated his civil rights and hindered his ability to assist his defense. Now, the mental health professional, Dr. Monica Weller, she's a psychologist at the time for the Westville Correctional Facility, provided critical testimony. Now, this is what she got. During the confession session, Dr. Waller testified that Allen confessed to the murders of Abby Williams and Libby German during their sessions. In one instant, he stated, "I killed Abby and Libby. I will kill everyone. I will wipe out everybody." He also mentioned starting World War III. She notes mental health deterioration. She observed a significant decline in Allen's mental health, noting that he began expressing suicidal thoughts and feelings of hopelessness around April of 2023. His behavior included banging his head against concrete walls and ingesting his own feces. A lot of people have also connected this to the time when he found his discovery. And then basically, I believe what happened here, to be honest with you, but I could be wrong, is that I think he went into well, let's get to it. Let me not jump ahead. Hold on, because I have a bit of a theory. And uncertainty about authenticity. So Dr. Waller did acknowledge uncertainty regarding whether Allen's behaviors was a genuine mental health crisis or feigned. Her notes indicated moments of doubt about the authenticity of his symptoms. Now, you also got the officers who also heard the confessions, and a lot of the officers on the stand believe that he could be faking it. And listen, they may not be mental health professionals, but the officers watch these inmates every day. And I did a show a few weeks back about we could see these inmates eventually when they take the mask off, when they stop playing their games, when they look to breathe, where maybe the mental health professionals, they may only see them in the moment. The correctional officers are seeing them second by second. So I think they really truly have an understanding of who that person is, but also some of their motives. Now, Russ, real quick, let's just get this cleared. Solitary confinement. I mean, that term is used, and I think people use it because it connects to this primitive practice that I don't see us doing anymore. I don't see us doing that since I've been in the profession for over 22 years. But this solitary confinement, I always feel like it connects to a political agenda.
It always does connect to a political agenda. It's there's nowhere in any literature I've ever seen that's been written for policy and procedure where it refers to using solitary confinement. There's I've said, and people will see all the time where I say that our use of administrative segregation, our use of security housing units, our use of protective housing units. Gosh, what else do we have out there? Restorative housing units, etc. Reflects the fact that we don't use that as a tool. Now, those things can be all of those different types of housing. They can be isolative, meaning that these individuals are not necessarily going to have the same amount of contact that general population does. But that doesn't mean that they're in isolation. It doesn't mean that they have any sort of solitary confinement. The word solitary meaning by themselves all the time. There's no sense of sensory deprivation, or maybe I shouldn't say sensory deprivation. I should say deprivation of human contact. They have less of it, but they get to see mental health. They certainly get to see their lawyer. They certainly get to see other people who are on their visitation list. And so this whole idea where people just use that term, well, there's some people that are using it in the form of an agenda, such as, lawyers and politicians. But certainly I know and I experience all the time where certain, correctional officers, correctional staff, they use it merely because it's kind of out there in the predominant vernacular of our time, even though it doesn't accurately reflect what's going on. So I think that it's something that we should be cognizant and careful of saying, because this is clearly not the case. Now, I won't say that I'm intimately familiar with Indiana's particular brand of administrative segregation, or I believe he was in protective housing or safekeeping, as it were. But I've been around lots of instances where we were doing safekeeping of one type or another. And, nobody is in the back corner of some darkened cell and the slop just comes under the door and no one talks to them. This is not that at all. And so now I think there's something to be said with regards to, his mental state and how that came about. But I think that they're kind of, hoping to try and place, his downfall, his downgrading, the decline that he was on the backs of the system, because the system is the thing that is actually putting him on trial. And so that makes for, a better narrative, if you will, when you're trying to get your client off.
Yeah, and guys, if you notice too, I mean, we're going to kind of call this isolation because there's going to be many different reasons why you would isolate an inmate. So we're going to remove solitary confinement. And if I do say it by mistake, because I also sometimes may use the term, granted, it's isolation. And there's many reasons why you're going to isolate an inmate. But with that said, Russ mentioned a good point. They're not isolated from human contact. I mean, if you look at this psych, Monica Walla, look how many times she saw him in those areas. Now, if you were to compare that to GP inmates, there's a lot of GP inmates that would never see a psych once during their whole stay. So I think when inmates are put in isolation and they know that maybe they're going to be limited with contact with other inmates, what happens here is we pick up the ball. Mental health will check on them daily, just to make sure things are moving the way it's supposed to be moving. So solitary confinement, to me, I think of, locking someone away and forgetting about them, throwing them in the dark and all this other stuff. And I've never seen that in the course of my 20-something years in the business. But I will say that we do isolate, and there's going to be many reasons why we isolate inmates. And this is where the first part of the discussion is going to be. So the first part of the discussion, we're going to talk about, first we're going to talk about housing and management of high-profile inmates. And guys, real quick, maybe, I don't think this is going to happen, but with that said, if the confessions are going to be a big part of the case and the defense is really attacking, the system in an effort to negate the confessions of Richard Allen, maybe it wouldn't be so bad if the jurors could take a trip down to where these inmates are held, talk to staff, see what the job is like, see how active that staff is and how on top of them, but also talk to custody. And you could also see how inmates may play the game, because there's benefits behind maybe pretending that you're starting to have a mental health concern. And we're going to go over that too. But mind you, let me put it out there right now, because of the seriousness, whether you're feigning an illness or not, you're still going to be treated at the highest level, because the biggest concern that we have is, even if you're faking it, you're still looking to get attention. And the problem is your effort to get attention could lead you to do foolish things, if that makes any sense. So, Russ, the first thing I want to talk about is housing and management of high-profile inmates, which Richard Allen would be a part of that. I mean, he's going through a high-profile case. It's going through trial right now. Things are being discovered. So management has to make an effort to protect these individuals. The last thing we want as an agency or just at the facility level is we don't want the inmate to die on our watch. Not now, really not ever, but definitely not now. We need to make sure that we hold that inmate here so the families, the victims, whatever, they can get closure. So with that said, there are going to be extra precautions taken for Richard Allen because he's a high-profile case. And the reason why is because the media's got a hold of this one. There's a lot of crimes that probably deserve more attention than Richard Allen's, and I'm not negating or minimizing this case. Just hear me out. But they don't get the attention. In this case here, Richard Allen, for some reason, he's got the attention. Again, it could be because of the outcry from the public that wants those answers, because it happens. Now, when you have that attention, the attention now goes wherever Richard Allen goes. The attention goes to wherever Richard Allen goes. So now that attention at the time of him being in solitary went to Westville. Now, funny thing is, guys, if you look up a lot of crimes that are in the system, as I said, there's a lot that you may never even heard of. There's a lot that we see in the files like, oh my God, I can't believe this didn't get the attention. So sometimes the media just picks on something. They see there's an interest, or they see there's a way that they can maybe spew out some conspiracy theories to some extent, and they sell it. Now the problem is, we in the prison and jail system, we have to manage this individual in an effort to make sure that the time there is as safe for them as possible. So this is where isolation comes into play. Not solitary confinement, isolation. The type of isolation we're talking about here is some level of protective custody. So, Russ, the first thing I got when it comes to housing and management of high-profile inmates is the increased security measures. High-profile inmates are often housed in more secure or isolated units to manage risks related to their notoriety, including potential threats from other inmates or heightened security concerns. So I would not consider this solitary confinement, Russ.
No, and that's why I've always railed against that term. Like I say, once again, the things that we do may be isolative, but that's not even necessarily isolation. I've seen so many different cases that were high notoriety, special circumstances, death penalty cases, the whole nine yards, and all you can really do is you try and put these individuals into a place where they are unlikely to get hurt and they are unlikely to hurt others. And that is the main reason for doing that. Depending on the specific circumstances, there may be issues with regards to their case where we're trying to protect the integrity of the either the investigation or protect the integrity of the court process. And so when we're doing that, we may further limit, the amount of access that these individuals might have through the mail, through who's allowed to come and visit them, through who they're allowed to have, contact with at all. But those are, just things that are, pretty much, put on us by the court, if you will. Otherwise, most of the time, these people do have the ability to contact people in the outside world. And so it's not nearly, constraining with regards to human contact as some people would lead you to believe.
Yeah. And guys, we kind of, if you want to do a catch-all term, I put a catch-all term as preventive isolation. Basically, it's the inmates that you may want separated from the general population to prevent conflicts, avoid potential harm, and mitigate risk associated with their public profile. And guys, be wary when the case is ongoing, as it is right now. Things could pop up, at any moment. So even if you try to make an effort to put them in GP, something pops up in the trial, then you got to pull them back, and then you just don't want to take that risk. So what you do is you keep them isolated at least until the trial plays its course. Now, usually this would be at a jail level, but if you're talking about long term, sometimes the prison may be better suited to handle this type of stay in what would be protective custody. Now, granted, guys, protective custody even has layers. I mean, the first time could be some form of non-congregate, but then it could evolve into a congregate setting. So at that point there, it's like, maybe we do got to introduce them to somebody. So it's very controlled. That's the one thing I would like to say here when they get to the isolation is it's a very controlled effort. Not only is there an effort there to make sure that the person is protected from harm from other inmates, but you also got to make sure that they don't do anything to themselves. I mean, this is literally a person who was on the streets who could have been living a normal life, whatever it is. Then he goes to jail or goes to prison. Well, jail first, then prison. And then, there's a total change in his lifestyle. Now he's being judged by the public, whether he's innocent or not. I mean, that's not really the bulk of this dialogue, but he's getting judged. If he did do the crime, he could be haunted by some level of grief, because that does happen. I do believe there's notes that when he was in solitary confinement, he had discovered God. And I think, to be honest with you, I think that could have played some role because he's by himself and he discovered God, maybe, could be. And then what happened is now he starts to feel guilt for what he's done. And then what happens here, I think he talks to his lawyers. They get the discovery. They find out that the state doesn't have that strong of a case, but you were a fool. You already confessed. So now we got to go ahead and minimize the confession. And the best way to do it is to attack the system. So technically the system is just like the scapegoat. So you had someone who probably was in jail, maybe felt some level of guilt for what he's done. And maybe that could have caused some psychosis. I don't know. Or maybe that aggravated symptoms he already had because it seemed like he was a depressed individual. So this on top of it, he had a chance. He was by himself, thought about what he did. That triggered his downfall maybe. And then what happens is, as I said, the discovery comes in. They realize there's not that strong of a case. And now he's going to go ahead and they're going to try to pull back on the confessions and use the facility as a scapegoat. Now, Russ, this is the one thing here. As I said, preventive isolation. We kind of talked about it in two forms, self-harm or, harm from others. But you're also going to have the enhanced surveillance, right? You're going to have high-profile inmates who are typically monitored more closely, often with additional restrictions that limit contact with others and access to certain privileges. I agree with that. That's true, right?
Absolutely. And, what you tend to see is here, how do I put this? Whether he's guilty or innocent, there is potential for him to do harm to himself. And, that comes in the way of, possibly committing suicide. If he's having genuine, and I think that obviously, some level of his diminished, mental capacity or whatever we want to call it, is real, then it puts him in a very real position to, to actually maybe, act out on those things and to commit suicide or make an attempt or to do something else that may be harmful to him. That's not necessarily a suicide attempt, but rather, something where, he's crying out, trying to get attention, or he doesn't understand that something like that might hurt him. Inmates, we get them and we get them as they are. And, oftentimes they do have, mental issues, physical issues. And so they are just, at a higher level of vulnerability for acting out, lashing out, which could hurt someone else, or taking their own life. And so we want to be able to put these strictures on his what limited freedom he has inside the walls in order to make sure that he's able to go to trial and that he does not end up taking his own life, and that we spare his life at all costs, because we are not in the business of helping people to get along down that particular path. So, I said all that in this big roundabout way to try and clue people in to the fact that we are very conscious of the issues about mental health, and as it pertains and applies to people who are in positions to potentially commit suicide.
Yeah, and guys, S watches, I'll say the word once, suicide watches, but we'll call them S watches because YouTube could mess with it. Suicide S watches, are not solitary confinement either, because even though the person is by themselves, they're constantly being observed. So they are going to have interactions with staff daily, pretty much second by second. One of the things that I was concerned about when listening to them cover this part is that while the inmate was in suicide watch or S watch, that's going to be tough for me to do, constant watch, let's just do that, he was allowed his tablet. He was allowed to call his family. I mean, there's so many things there to me that was a concern, because when I have an inmate that's on suicide watch or constant watch, you have to go ahead and make sure that you limit their impulse to do something foolish. So usually, you could have the catch-all. In this case here, high-profile inmates facing intense public scrutiny or severe legal consequences may be placed on suicide watch as a precaution, which involves constant or frequent monitoring, can further impact their mental state. So that's usually when we're doing the precautionary measure. Like, yeah, it makes sense. Let's put him on. I know he's saying he's okay, but there's a lot of stuff going on in his life right now that's situational that I can't just ignore. So let's put him on constant watch and let's see how this works. So, and that makes sense. There's what we call the fall. Well, not that he was that high in grace anyway, but the fall from grace technically, right? But now you have also the inmates that realize that, hey, maybe in an effort to control my narrative or to control where I stay, maybe I'll say I'm going to hurt myself and I'll say foolish things because I know that's going to get me the attention I need, which I'm going to explain shortly. We have that too. I'm going to cover that, Russ. But I want to mention something. The fact that he had all these things in his cell, the fact that he was able to call his family when he was on this watch from what it looks like was happening, that's a problem for me, because when mental health is doing their rounds and they're checking on those inmates that are on those constant watches, they can't have counter influence. They got to make sure that pretty much they're the ones that are speaking to this individual so they can control any behavior that may be seen as impulsive. So it's kind of weird that you're able to let him take phone calls when he's, on this watch, which usually I don't think would normally be the practice, that he's able to have a tablet, a bunch of other things. To me, it didn't make any sense. I felt like at that point here, this constant watch really wasn't a constant watch. And I have a feeling that people are a bit confused because I'm not used to any practices of any S watches or constant watches that allows why the person is on a constant watch phone calls, or that allows them to have a tablet on them. I think there's a bit of confusion there. What's your thoughts on that, Russ?
Yeah, when you said that, he was actually on a suicide watch, I don't know. I kind of like, experienced a little bit of like, what, that it doesn't sound right to me. Number one is, in the experiences that I've had with that, is we would never allow them contact with someone from their outside world because that has the potential to set them off in exactly the wrong direction. Imagine, that you have them on suicide watch and then they get some bad news from a family member. Oh, little Johnny died, or you know what? I'm going to ask for a divorce, or any number of other things that could be bad. And if they really are having a psychotic break, the last thing that we want to do is introduce them into a situation where they get some news from family or conflict with a family member that they've had a history of conflict with. And then, you're going from, a 72-hour watch to, a full 1 week. And, we always control all of the property that goes in their cell extremely well anyway. And so the idea that, oh, he's got a tablet. Well, a tablet, that's bad news because, they can break those apart and they can cut their jugular, any number of things. So is he really in danger of killing himself then? So I don't know if they were going in there thinking that there was some kind of half measures that they could do. I remember a guy coming, off of suicide watch one time, and I was there. I was doing the constant watch, and the psychiatrist, who should know better than me, said, "Oh, you know what? We're going to give him a blanket." And I was just like, "Okay." And the next thing we know is the guy's attempting suicide. And so, like, what the heck, we have like a step down measure kind of thing, but he was still on suicide watch. It wasn't a situation where we were letting him go back to a unit and continuing the watch there, but seeing how he integrates in. No, they just decided to, give him a blanket, inside of the suicide watch cell. And then, next thing we know, the blanket is around his neck and we're going in there and it's just, crazy. So anyway, those are the things that we contend with. Those are the things that shout out to me like this doesn't sound quite accurate. So I don't know necessarily what that's all about. I think though that there's some things they need to answer for, unless maybe, of course, that is their policy, that is their procedure, and that's the way they do it. We see that time and time again through corrections, different organizations have different ideas about, how they want to carry out that particular mission. But as I've said, I've seen enough harmful stuff or potential harmful stuff be taken away by just, cutting off contact if that's necessary.
Yeah, and the funny thing is the department's at fault for doing it. Yet here he is. He had multiple contacts with his family and with the lawyer. So I mean, he was engaged. I mean, he made over 700. I think phone calls. So I mean, obviously they were allowing him to have the contact. How do we know that it wasn't the relationships on the outside that were causing the stress? Maybe because he was trying to manage a different type of relationship with his wife now, because now she's living life and he's here inside the prison. I mean, there's just too many dynamics there to go ahead and say, well, the facility's at fault. Well, if you want to say the facility's at fault because it was all isolated, stuff like that, well, how does that explain 700 phone calls? I mean, I'm surprised no one's even bringing that up. And then obviously we talked about the public perception and reputation. So actions taken by high-profile inmates are often scrutinized by both the institution and the public, affecting their behavior and sometimes leading them to seek additional accommodations to manage their image. Guys, what's causing a problem here right now is the attention on the media, these different stories being thrown around. And now, as I said, it makes it harder for us to go ahead and, do what we got to do to protect this individual. And I know people want to bastardize the system, but you got people that are just throwing out these crazy conspiracy theories, whether he did it or not. And it's like every time they want to have this trial kind of as private as possible, but then you got the media bringing it out to the world, and it's like, well, then it's hard. It was like, well, how do you find someone that's not biased? It's because well, it's going to be hard. Yeah, because of you guys. I mean, it's sad to say, but I know we have a right to know sometimes, and we do, but we got to be careful what we do with that information. I mean, that's the key. The key is, what do you do with the information that you're being provided? Do you quickly go on the internet right now and launch conspiracy theories, whether it's against Alan, whether it's against the criminal justice system or whatever it is? So even what me and Russ doing right now, we're defending the position of the system. Now, I do want to touch on why people may feign illness in the correction setting, because it does happen. And I have a few reasons why. Yep, what happens. I have a few reasons why. By the way, it's not all inclusive, but it gives you an idea. That's the key. So let me go ahead and get it up. Reasons why inmates may feign mental health concerns. So first one I got overall, technically, is I think in some cases it's a way for them to control the narrative, because when you're in a prison setting, we have to respond to mental health crises, even if we have reason to believe that the person's faking it. It doesn't matter. It's going to get an initial reaction from staff, and that's just at the facility level. I mean, this I think when it comes to all the different reasons why people may feign a mental health crisis, it really falls under this umbrella, controlling the narrative. It's an effort to control the narrative. And believe it or not, it works very well. So let's give some components, Russ. So the first thing I got here, let's talk about, because this could be the case too, seeking different housing. Displaying mental health symptoms may allow inmates to be placed in safer or less restrictive housing, which can be especially appealing for high-profile inmates under close monitoring. Were they getting ready to release him to GP? Was he getting ready to go to Wabash or whatever? I mean, was he getting ready to be moved? And maybe he thought by doing this could delay the process, or it could give him some control in the process. So if he does get moved into the other facility, they put him right on that status. I mean, Russ, I mean, again, this is just, speculation, but just to give the idea, inmates want to control where they're housed. And a good way to do that is, unfortunately, to play this game. Would you agree, Russ?
Yeah, I've seen guys try and change their housing, doing all kinds of different things. Some of those being medical. I've seen guys fake seizures. I've seen them fake, diabetic episodes. I've seen them, fake this, that, and the other thing. I've seen them really, truly hurt themselves. I've seen them ingest things so that they vomit in front of staff. I've seen them, and the list just goes on and on. The number of things they do is just, appalling. And so that is one way that they can have a chance to control that, because sometimes they'll end up being admitted. And if they get admitted, even if it's in a suicide cell, with an anti-terror smock and stuff, it gives them a chance to maybe get away from the population a little bit. Maybe someone there was pressuring them. Maybe someone there was extorting them. Maybe someone there is an enemy and was going to do them harm. And there's so many different things and reasons why they would do this. I mean, I can go, on and on. That sometimes these guys, believe it or not, they're just seeking the attention of some female nurses, who are going to be, nice to them and, give them, an extra dessert at the end of the night or something. And so they'll do that. They'll fake a seizure just to get that done. And as I say, the list goes on and on.
Yeah. And Russ, I want to add to this too, is that guys, inmates are aware that very rarely, if not ever, I really don't, I don't remember me ever doing it. You don't override a mental health decision. So if I can get mental health under my thumb, I could have a big control of not just the facility, but other things. I mean, no one is going to override a mental health decision. If mental health says, hey, this inmate is not fit to go back to GP, management may say, well, may try to work with them. But ultimately, if mental health doesn't co-sign it, management is probably going to keep them wherever they're at. So having said that, I think a lot of inmates may also be aware, inmates that know the game, that, hey, if I can get mental health under my thumb, I can have a big control of a lot of things. I just got to control that one therapist, I also added access to additional resources. So I got a mental health diagnosis could provide access to resources like therapy sessions, increased staff attention, or specific privileges, which may offer more comfort and control, which is funny because I felt that's what Dr. Walla was doing, giving him the phone call, saying, oh, he's got to talk to his family. And in my mind, I was like, you know what? You're giving him the privileges. Why supposedly he's still on watch, which I thought would be in conflict, like we mentioned before about her, really trying to see what he's about without any counter influence. But Russ, I like what it says here when it says, provide access to resources like therapy sessions, increase staff attention. So here you have this inmate, right? Now, guys, he's having a mental health crisis, supposedly, right? And then everybody goes quick to talk about how solitary confinement is. But you know that when they have this mental health crisis, it increases the attention that they get with mental health. So you don't take it away, you give more. What's your thoughts on that, Russ?
Yeah, all these things, come in that package, and it can be things, even like, additional or new medications, things that, allow them to, maybe go on some little, adventures inside their head. Maybe it gives them a way for some of them that are seeking a way out to be able to cheat some of that medication and potentially try and use it in a suicide attempt down the road, or maybe they misuse it and abuse it in a way that actually causes them to decompensate more. I've just seen these things over and over again, and this is what that subset of the population does. That is what they do. That is the way that they are. And so, all of that comes into play. Absolutely.
And then I also got a few more. Temporary escape or relief. Mental health claims may be used to gain temporary relief from daily stresses or routines, providing isolation time, one-on-one attention, or a break from assigned tasks, which we kind of discussed. Yeah. But basically, a lot of the inmates, believe it or not, and I don't think the public knows this, they want to be on their own. They want to have their own cell. They don't want to have a cellmate. And sometimes when the stress of GP, we're having a cellmate and I need me time. I just need me time. They will maybe feign some self-injurious behavior, whatever it is, so they can get a bit of a break and find themselves in those areas. And the funny thing is sometimes, and guys, this is not a catch-all, this is just a perspective. Sometimes they play the mental health route because it's more long-term than just doing the immediate. So like, if you play the mental health route and you do start feigning illnesses, which Dr. Wallace said, he could have, the thing is, you still have to give them their treatment. You still got to play the game. So it gives them a more long-term chance to have some control. And by the way, if by chance they start to lose control, and let's say, in this case here, we want to move them back, they begin the cycle all over again, and then it just, you got to go through it. What's your thoughts on that, Russ? That temporary escape or relief?
Yeah, I think all of that is, pretty much wrapped up in, some of what we said before. These are all ways to just, how do I put it? Change the routine. It changes the routine for them for the moment and potentially for the long term as well. And, it gives them a chance to, like we said, access some of these things that they don't necessarily always get. And some of those things can be very harmful for them. It's just, kind of dependent on that. And so, I always used to give you an idea how bad it was. Is sometimes we'd have, some inmates out on our yard and, 2-3 times a week, they'd be, having a seizure, and so you'd go out there and you'd, try and isolate them, wait for medical to arrive. And sometimes in the meantime, you'd break up on a little smelling salts and see if they would react to that, which most of them did. And that kind of, showed that they weren't, necessarily on the up and up. But the bad thing is there's really nothing you can do about it. Whether they're faking or whether it's real, they still have to be treated. They have to either be treated for the mental issue that they're going through, or they have to be treated through the physical issue that's, causing the seizure. But either way, it can be a hassle dealing with that day after day after day.
Yeah, and then we have the legal strategy. It's funny because once the confessions came out, now all of a sudden it's the system. It wasn't the system before, but it's the system now when you got to look to negate the confessions because maybe when they received the discovery, they found some loopholes. And now it's like, well, you already made the confession. Well, you made the confession to control the narrative, whatever you try to do. You wanted to kind of control the next step or, maybe look for some leniency. But now you got your lawyers maybe saying, could be wrong, but you never know, maybe saying, hey, they don't got a strong case here, but you already confessed. Damn it. Now we have to go attack the system. Well, it's funny. I wonder how many complaints they put in before the confession, because I'm sure I'm sure Richard could have been, when he was in this type of setting, making all these complaints, maybe. I'm wondering if the lawyers acted on anything, but the moment he makes the confession, all of a sudden it's bad. It's worse. It's legal strategy. Establishing a mental health condition could potentially influence legal proceedings, parole decisions, sentence terms by highlighting specific needs or diminished responsibility. Now, there's I also have avoiding suicide watch conditions. Now, I want you to hear me on this because I think this does play out. Some inmates may feign or exaggerate symptoms to avoid or manipulate suicide watch conditions, which involves intense monitoring and isolation that can feel overwhelming. So I'm thinking that he could have played the doctor out. Basically going through all his mental health concerns where the doctor allowed or pushed for the family phone calls or pushed for maybe the tablet or something to keep their mind busy. So now here's the scary thing, guys, and I want to mention something here. They said he was there for, let's say, 19 months or however long he was there for, and they should only go past 30 days. Well, here's the funny thing. When they're in those type of units, we want to make sure the inmate knows that this isn't permanent living. So you don't want to provide things that make it comfortable for them. Something as simple as a phone call, something as simple as the tablet. It's like, well, if I can get that here, then why the hell do I want to go back or have to go to GP or whatnot? I could try to live here. So I'm thinking that even though he was there for so long, he was given things that normal people on constant watch shouldn't be provided. At least that's what it's coming across on the transcripts. And the last thing you want to do, at least as a mental health professional, definitely on the safety and security side, is you don't want to make these type of units that I'm talking about, the suicide watch, wherever they do those, wherever that stabilization unit is, you don't want to treat that as a regular housing unit. You don't want to start introducing long-term property there, like, their TV, their tablet, Oh, let's start giving them phone calls. No, because it's going to be no different than the regular housing unit. So now they start to feel comfortable. And now, the person doesn't want to leave. And I'm wondering, when they talk about the 19 months, I don't know if he ever got any charges or anything, but I would love to see his institutional history, where the moment they try to clear him to go out, I wonder how many times he acted up right after that in an effort to stay. Because they could be saying, well, he had this psychosis. Yeah, but was it patterned? Like, did the person, every time they're getting ready to release him or discharge him, all of a sudden did the symptoms magically appear again? So they had to keep him there? I mean, was it 19 months as chosen by medical or mental health? Or was it really a pattern that was developed that the moment he was getting discharged, he acted up again? What's your thoughts, Russ?
Yeah. Once again, I've seen so many inmates, but they do have that pattern, and they just end up going ping ponging back and forth between mental health and some GP that here, or some special housing unit there, and it just becomes a crutch for them, because they don't want to live out there in the GP. They want to have a smaller number of people around them. They want a more controlled cell and setting. They want to be able to live life on their terms. And when they have significant mental problems, that gets to be a real issue, because oftentimes they simply can't handle the pressures of those things out there, or they're trying to manipulate the system in a way to be able to use that potentially, in a hearing, in a court case. In his case here, it looks like some type of manipulation is going on with regards to these confessions that he made. Because it's one thing just to say, "Hey, I killed somebody." I think that what they're going to have to really look at there is whether or not he opened up and disclosed anything that's probative, within the court case. I don't know how the judge is likely to rule, but if he just was making blanket statements that didn't contain extra information, there's not a lot that I think that the prosecutors can do with that other than present it to the jury. And that's going to leave the jury wondering well, that's all there is to it, just a statement of fact that he did it, not anything that elicits anything of a more probative nature.
And then the funny thing is, it could open up for a civil suit later on, and that's when you start to see the state's defense. Like right now, the state, the conditions affecting his confession, we'll be there, we'll talk. We'll get a few officers there, talk about his confession and maybe negate some of the concerns he had. But I'll guarantee you they would provide a bigger defense if they were being sued civilly. Now it becomes a whole different ball game, because now you want to take our money. Now we'll start to see kind of what me and Russ are doing now. It's a shame that we'll have to get to that point, but I feel that the state may not be truly invested as much as they should. I mean, from the Department of Corrections side, because I get it, it's going towards the confession. But if you were being sued civilly, because granted, if this case works out and they realize that the confessions are no good based on the conditions of solitary, well, then the problem is that can open up a lawsuit later on. The last thing I got is attention and compassion. Some inmates seek validation, sympathy, or basic human connection, and feigning mental health symptoms may elicit a compassionate response from staff providing emotional relief. Now, Russ, there was something funny I found here, by the way, and I want to get to that real quick. So a while ago, me and Russ were, very aware that some states were trying to implement inmates on doing S watches or suicide watches. And of course, me and Russ were totally against that. I'm going to list some of the pros and cons. I'm going to be fair. I'm going to put some pros and cons. So the pros are more of why they would do it, but the cons will definitely supersede that. But I want to mention something. They said that when they were on the stand, the administrator or the warden may have said something like the reason why they didn't want to have an inmate watching him was because when he got the discovery they didn't want the inmates kind of knowing what he did. Now, the only thing I thought about at that moment was, are we giving the inmate the discovery on constant watch? You know, that's the first thing that came to my mind. It's glad that you moved the inmates. They shouldn't be there anyway, but in the context, and maybe people that follow this case a little more could let me know, but that's what I felt was read to me, was that he decided to take the inmates out because they didn't want the inmates seeing the discovery, which means, are you giving the inmate, Richard Allen, the discovery why he's on some constant watch? It seems like this constant watch that they had is a lot different than the isolation that we talked about. It looks like they made this constant suicide watch living conditions. Like he could live there as if he was a regular GP inmate. Now, Russ, I want to get this part out. So I got pros. Pros are more of the reasons why, but I want to so you guys could see it. So this facility does have that, or did have, I don't know if they still do, but basically they have inmates watching inmates on suicide watch. So Russ, let's speak to what I'm going to do is I'm going to read these off, and then maybe you could give your your summation, I guess. This way we're not going through these things all one by one. Okay. But the first thing, so now Russ, when I say pro, guys, remember this is the reason why. And when we say the cons, you'll understand why these pros are easily going to get superseded by the cons. So the one thing is increased monitoring. So adding inmate watchers increases the number of eyes on at-risk individuals, especially in facilities with limited staff resources, which can reduce the likelihood of suicide attempts going unnoticed. Then you got the peer support and empathy. I'm really digging deep on this one, though, but inmates may be more relatable to one another and can sometimes offer a unique form of emotional support that encourages the at-risk inmate to open up, potentially providing a calming influence. Then you have cost savings. Let's get right down to it. Using inmates as suicide watchers can help reduce the strain on correctional staff and financial resources, as trained staff monitoring around the clock can be costly and challenging to maintain. Then I got sense of purpose and responsibility for inmate watchers. I mean, I'm really digging in deep here, guys. Being trusted with a task as serious as suicide watch can give inmate watchers a sense of purpose and responsibility, which may benefit their own rehabilitation and self-worth. And I went deep for that one. And improve facility morale. When inmates are involved in care for each other, it can foster a more supportive community and encourage positive relationships between inmates, potentially improving overall facility morale. Now, Russ, I know we have a lot of arguments against that. I have the cons. But before we discuss the cons, because that's going to be next, and we'll cover each one of these, let's talk about the mindset of why they would think that this is a pro. And then when we do the cons, we'll give our true thoughts as why this doesn't work. So what's the mindset here, Russ? This perfect world.
Okay, so so this is one of those things where people, react and have a visceral reaction to, oh, good, they're gonna get some attention. They're gonna get, they're gonna get someone that's gonna, watch out for them. There's gonna be a chance that this is gonna be helpful in their recovery, in their recuperation. And so people, just act, people just react to it, at that level, not understanding, all the layers of the onion that there are inside corrections. And then you get to see, admin and the managerial people and the politicians react to it. Yes, this is a win-win. We're saving money, and at the same time, we're ensuring the safety and security of the inmate population. And people just, run it all the way out without actually, thinking about the deeper levels here. And so, if people want to actually know what the deeper levels of thinking are like here, they should come to people like me and you, who have seen bad things play out and are capable of imagining, worst case scenarios and how those things could be played out, because I've been around some of the worst people on the entire planet. a few different times in my life. And so, what, maybe I have a little bit of insight that the average Joe citizen doesn't have, maybe even the average Joe correctional officer doesn't have. So I think that's why we see this.
Now, Russ, I got the cons. I'm going to read straight through them. Now, Russ, this is what you're going to want to explore, but I got more cons. But now I want you to also take a look at, I think these cons are definitely greater. Now, I think ultimately, to be honest with you, we have understaffed facilities, so this could have been a last-ditch effort, which is still not right. And it's also cost saving, still not right. But now, check out these cons. Now, these cons far outweigh any of the pros. And again, I only said pros because it's more understood. It's really just their reasoning why. So now, this is what I got. So the first thing I got is the inmates. It's truly going to be some level of true professional training, because even if you train them within the facility, it's not like the type of training that a mental health professional gets, that a correctional officer gets. So inmates lack the specialized training that correctional and mental health staff receive to handle crises, making them less equipped to recognize nuanced signs of distress or respond appropriately in emergencies. I think the nuance part is what matters the most too on that. I got the emotional toll on the watchers. Watching a suicidal inmate can be emotionally taxing for them. And without appropriate support or mental health resources, the watchers themselves may experience stress, anxiety, or trauma. I got privacy and trust issues. Having other inmates monitor someone on suicide watch can feel invasive, potentially leading to trust issues or discomfort for the at-risk inmate who may already feel vulnerable. So that's the privacy and trust issues. Then I got risk of manipulation or misconduct. Inmates on suicide watch may try to manipulate or deceive their watchers, or vice versa. There's also a risk that inmates could take advantage of this position to assert control or exploit vulnerable inmates. I also got legal and ethical concerns. If an inmate on suicide watch were to harm themselves while being monitored by another inmate, there could be significant legal and ethical repercussions. Relying on inmates instead of trained staff might be seen as a lack of duty of care. And yeah, but staff's nearby. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because the staff is the one that should be maintaining vigilance. And the last one I got, Russ, is potential for peer pressure and retaliation. The inmate watcher may feel pressured by others to act in certain ways, or they might be targeted for retaliation, especially if their monitoring leads to disciplinary action against the at-risk inmate. And my thought for this was, Russ, is if you're watching me, and let's say you're an inmate, and I'm trying to tell you, don't mess this up for me. I want to stay here. So don't mess this up for me. Now it puts the inmate in a chance where he may not be that watcher that we need. He may be doing what he can because he's being pressured by the inmate. And I want to say one last thing here, Russ, before you introduce your thoughts. Remember, guys, even though custody or the facility itself is the ultimate line of accountability, the peers around them, trust and believe, inmates, the peer-to-peer pressure is a lot greater than whatever pressure we could apply on them. What's your thoughts on this, Russ, on the cons of inmate participating in suicide watch? I know there's a lot here.
Okay. So let me just, I don't know if you'll consider this adding one or not, but there is a lack of, accountability for these individuals. You know, if they do something or they don't do something, you know, how do we really hold them accountable? It's not like the kind of accountability that I would face in a situation like that. I mean, I could certainly lose my job. I could certainly potentially face criminal charges. I could be civilly sued. Do you think an inmate cares about any of that? I think not. You know, and then when we start talking about level of care aspects, so those cut really deep. You know, especially within the confines of the structure of the power dynamic between ethnicities and security threat groups. Oh my God. I mean, can you imagine? And I know that people are not going to like hearing this. I already know it. But you've got maybe an inmate who is a watcher and he's white, and the individual that he's watching is black. and it's incumbent upon him to save that individual's life by saying, hey, he's committing suicide. Man, do you know what the peer pressure is like for a white inmate that does something like that? Boy, we're getting into a whole can of worms that I would say most of our audience can't even begin to understand with regards to that. And then when we start looking at the civil issues, there's potential there for a whole lot of manipulation. You could have an inmate contacting family members on the outside and telling them about what's going on and feeding them either a line of bull or a line to reel them in and say, hey, you know what? I know that you guys don't really like, Uncle Steve. But you know what? Maybe if, he checked his way out, you guys could get some money and maybe you could give me a little bit of that. And you could have people manipulating, inmates into suicide or not doing anything to prevent them, or worse yet, actually, delivering to them the means in order to get a payoff. This is in no ways above anything that I've seen these individuals do, and they will do it. And then, if I start touching on things with regards to extortion, they could extort family members by telling them, hey, he's in seg, and guess what? There's some people after him because he left them holding a drug debt. And because he's the only one with any actual communication, he instead can extort them out of money by claiming there's a threat on this guy. And maybe he's not even going to, hurt the guy at all. He's just going to manage to extort the family. That's the way criminal enterprises and criminal mindsets work. And I know it's hard for people to understand that is the way that it is inside correctional facilities. And so you have to be on guard against all of these types of things. Because you know what? It's not just weapons and dope and riots. Like I said, the level of extortion, the level of the STG threat, the level of all of these things poses a significant threat. And then you want to take and intersperse these watchers, these helpers amongst them, and put them in positions of power without accountability where they can manipulate people. I guarantee you will have bad outcomes. And I'm not saying that they won't be successful in some areas at some times, but if you're doing it to save a buck and you're doing it because you don't think that you have staff that are well trained enough, you better train those staff is what you better do.
Yeah, and guys, I want to mention. So I'm texting someone right now. So I'm just curious about this. Maybe it's another question that should be asked. When Richard Allen's placed on constant watch, is he brought to a stabilization unit, or they just changed the label on his door? Because he also had a Bible on him when he was there. He was eating pieces of the Discovery while he was on watch. So either they give him these things when he's in the stabilization unit, or they just put someone in front of his housing door and just watch him with all this stuff, or maybe they take stuff away, but strategically. But for me, a constant watch observation, even a close watch, they got nothing. They pretty much just the mattress, turtle gown, or maybe if they start to move up, you can get them like some type of clothing that's a little bit more different than a turtle gown, but turtle suit. And now another thing is, guys, I want to mention something else about the system. So when we're talking about isolation, screw solitary confinement, right? But we've talked about the many reasons why people could be isolated, usually defined at the core that is safety and security. So even punitive housing has a level of, it's about safety and security. This person is a threat to the population. PC, that person could be threatened by the population. Somewhere along the line, it usually relates to safety and security. But believe it or not, each one of these isolated housings usually has a level system, which means that the inmates are able to move up through the levels and then be introduced to some level of GP. So if it's the PC setting, it could be, for example, a more controlled congregate interaction with other inmates, but highly filtered. For the punitive section, it could be just a few level system that can start to slowly reintroduce them to the population. But the problem is this: if you give them too much when they're in the initial settings of these isolated confinements, then there's no reason for them to want to move up, because they rather have a cell on their own for the most part. So you have to be very wary that when they go to these isolated housing type things, and you do want to make an effort to move them up, especially if it's on the punitive side. PC could be a little bit different because there's a lot of things that go into play before you start to move the person up. You could have people that want to move up, but the facility's like, nah, it's too dangerous. Like, even if Rich Allen wanted to go to GP, I wouldn't approve it. So Rich Allen may not have control of that. But just to give another example with the punitive side, they may, if you give them too much at the very beginning, they want to stay. They won't want to go. And then the problem is, what people aren't asking is, was there ever a chance that he could have phased out and he wind up doing something that brought him back in and had him recycled? Like, was it 30 days where he was discharged multiple times and he just, like, I would ask this: how many times when he was in this setting was he discharged and forced to be brought right back? And that's when you'll see where, well, we went to go discharge him, his behavior became more erratic. Well, that's the pattern now. It seems to be that it becomes more erratic every time he's about ready to get discharged. I would ask that, because here's the funny thing: when you start manipulating the system, you may be a little bit passive with your temp, but the moment they go to discharge you and there's a chance that you got to go back to wherever you got to go back to, now you become a little bit more aggressive. And I think there's patterns there. I will guarantee you that this person, they may have said been in this confined setting, but I'm very curious to see if he played a part in that. And as I said, I don't consider PC solitary confinement. I don't. But I know sometimes, I'm not saying it's the case with Richard Allen, you could gradually introduce him to like a PC setting with GP, like a GP PC setting, and they may not want it. So I'm very curious to see. I know they may say that the state held him there for 19 months, but I'm very curious to see if there's any patterns that force the state to do it. But at this point, I definitely don't see him ever being neglected. Now, here's the last part of the discussion, Russ. So I'm going to first discuss, I hate using the word solitary confinement, but I think we understood that isolation is not just, there's no solitary, guys. An inmate could be isolated for any reason. Again, it's more determined by safety and security. So most of these thoughts are primitive in nature. So, Russ, the very first part will be arguments that are against solitary confinement, but unfortunately, it's been generalized to isolation, and that's a problem for the system. If you start telling the system that we can't isolate inmates, then we can't protect them. It's right there. We can't protect them. We can't protect the GP. Isolation is done in a manner where no one's rights is forgotten or not cared about. It's just we have to do that to maintain safety and security. So sometimes when we make the effort to isolate, people like to switch that and say solitary confinement. That's not the case. So what I'm going to say is arguments against isolation, because a lot of people like to equate isolation to solitary confinement. These are going to be the arguments against isolation. And now, mind you, these arguments are going to be very primitive, and it's going to be related on the term solitary confinement. Then when me and Russ discuss the pros, you'll see it's really isolation and it's not solitary confinement. But let me go ahead and run these through real quick, and then, Russ, I'd love to get your thoughts. Now, mind you, Russ, same thing as we did before, kind of the mindset. And then don't worry, Russ, I got a list of the pros on why isolation is needed. So again, I'm getting rid of solitary confinement, and this is basically the argument against isolation, because that's what they're trying to tell you. You can't isolate an inmate, which is not correct. So the first thing we got is they're going to say social isolation and psychological distress. So you have prolonged isolation can cause intense loneliness, leading to depression, anxiety, and cognitive decline due to lack of social interaction. If I could just give one comment there, most of the time when people are left alone like this, part of that psychological break could be they're coming into terms with what they've done, because they have no one that they can talk to who can minimize their accountability, who can feel sorry for them, who they can draw sympathy from. So they're left to deal with those demons. They're left to deal with the consequences of what they've done without anyone there to say, oh, it wasn't your fault. You have the increase of mental health disorders. So solitary confinement can trigger or worsen conditions like paranoia or psychosis, even in previously healthy individuals. Then you got it's always going to be mental health. Then you got the cognitive decline and sensory deprivation. The absence of mental stimulation and interaction can impair memory, concentration, and problem-solving abilities. It's that an interaction, which we talked about before. They have more interaction with staff than inmates and GP. Then you got suicidal thoughts and behaviors. Inmates in solitary confinement are at a higher risk of experiencing suicidal thoughts or attempting suicide due to severe psychological stress and feelings of hopelessness. And it's funny because it's all situational that they bring here. It doesn't talk about what they could be developing on the inside that could also be causing it, which means maybe they're starting to face with some level of accountability what they've done. I've seen inmates who have had time for themselves that will come back and said, I needed that alone time because now there was no one telling me or minimizing what I've done. It was just me versus what I've done. And I've came out better for it. In this case here, I found God. This one pisses me off. Loss of sense of time and reality, limited access to natural light or time markers can cause disorientation, hallucination, and a distorted sense of reality. That's that one. Emotional instability and impulse control issues. Prolonged isolation can lead to irritability, impulsivity, and mood swings, making emotional regulation challenging. Then you got increased vulnerability to PTSD. Solitary confinement can be a traumatic experience, making inmates more susceptible to post-traumatic stress disorder. Physical health impact. Chronic stress from isolation can cause physical health issues, including high blood pressure, heart problems, and weakened immunity. And medical does visit those units daily. Difficult reintegrating into society. Extended time in isolation may impair social skills and hinder inmates' ability to reintegrate, potentially leading to recidivism. And then ethical concerns and human rights violations. Many human rights organizations view prolonged solitary confinement as psychological torture, especially for those held without sufficient cause. So, Russ, to be the advocate on this side now, and then we'll talk about the cons, very primitive. All these stuff here that seems to be against solitary, which again, we're not doing, we're isolating, and I explain why. Seems to be very primitive that we keep people in the dark and that we kind of just let them fall and decompose, decompensate, and we don't care. And that's not, I've never seen that.
That's absolutely not the case. And I don't think necessarily that all of those things apply or that they're necessarily causal to their worsening condition. You know, people that are going out there and doing the things that cause them to end up being put into solitary confinement, isolation, and whatnot are the people that have proclivity towards that type of not mindset, but that type of mental, whether we want to call it decompensation or have those type of mental issues anyway. A person that goes out there and does these things, commits, assaults and violence and stabbings and everything else is the type of person who's more likely to have those type of issues. So you can't say that us taking them, away from the GP and sticking them in there is what causes that. No, that's not a cause. That's an effect. And so I think that, these people, have a warped view about what's actually going on. Now, is it optimal for them? No, probably not. But it can be optimal for other people. And I suspect that's what we're going to get into next.
Yeah. And guys, by the way, I'm sure when the defense attorneys saw that he made the confession and they kind of had to work at efforts to negate it, they went with the usual political agenda of solitary confinement without actually even understanding how the real world operates, because they know for a fact there's such a stigma. So this is reality right here, guys. We don't solitary, but there are reasons when we have to isolate. And I wanted to put that in here. So this is the next step. Arguments to support isolation, even though I put here solitary confinement because people confuse the term, but this is why we isolate inmates. So on the backbone of it all, safety and security. Solitary confinement can protect both the inmate and others by isolating those who pose a threat. Then you also got behavioral management tool. Let's not lie. For disruptive inmates, solitary confinement or isolation. It's isolation, guys. Let's get rid of the solitary confinement part because it's just too connected and been bastardized. And again, it's the definition of that does not fit to what we do. So isolation serves as a means of maintaining order and reinforcing rules within the institution. Then you got protection for vulnerable inmates. Certain inmates may face threats from others, and isolation offers a safer environment away from the general population. Preventing group conflicts and gang activity. Isolation of gang leaders or influential figures help disrupt organized violence or gang activities within the prison. Rusty been changing that recently. Temporary time for reflection. That's what we're talking about. Short-term confinement allows inmates time for introspection and can help them cool down their conflicts, reducing impulsive actions. Controlled environment for mental health monitoring. Controlled environment for mental health monitoring. There it is. For severely mental ill inmates, isolation can offer a controlled space where medical staff and mental health can closely observe them without general population pressure. And it's kind of weird that that's any type of counter influence. Alternative to physical restraints. Isolation provides a less invasive way to control inmates acting dangerously, avoiding physical restraints. Deterrent for misconduct. The possibility of isolation encourages some inmates to adhere to rules, helping maintain a safe environment. Not all, though. Trust me, not all, but a good portion. Especially if they're really invested in their doing things. Managing high-risk situations. For inmates posing significant risk, solitary or isolation is a necessary measure to contain that threat without escalating to more invasive interventions. And controlled duration and regulation. With time limits and oversight, isolation can be an effective tool. That's what we talked about the level program. When used responsibly, supporting institutional stability and safety. So I combine both. But with that said, guys, just get the rest. But I wanted to add one more thought to this. This is pretty much a needed tool because this is where it becomes damned if you do, damned if you don't. So if you don't isolate the inmate and something happens, like a Richard Allen, we're screwed. We're people are going to attack us for not protecting him. But then if we do this, you left him by himself. Well, you got to pick one. That's what's tough about corrections, right? We sometimes, right? We can't decide that provide us with these things where it's like, no, you got to somewhere make a choice. However controversial it be, make a choice. And the right choice is the preservation of life, which will always lean towards isolation at this point. But it's funny because you're going to be damned if you do. I put him in isolation and now you destroyed him mentally. Okay, well, I'll put him in GP. Now he's been killed. Where's the win? Nothing. So the House has to make a decision. And the decision is, hey, you want this guy to stand trial? You guys are putting this case all over the news, making it public. I got to protect this guy. I can't have him around just anybody. So, all that media coverage is one that's making it very hard for him to manage. So now we got to manage him here. Now you're going to judge how we're managing him, but yet you're the reason why we have to manage him that way because you're blasting everything on the news without any care as to who can see it. Especially in the population. The news, they can hear things. They watch the news every day. They read the paper. So it's like you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. Russ, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so the argument in favor, absolutely outweighs everything else. We have to have a way to deal with individuals that are problematic. And believe me, that doesn't mean that they're a little problematic. This means that they are problematic to us in a major way. I mean, you've got inmates out there that, are trying to kill staff. You have inmates out there that are trying to kill each other. You have inmates out there that are trying to escape. So what is it that we do is we're just going to allow an inmate to go out there and stab whoever he wants, get into a fist fight with whoever he wants. And all we're ever going to do is take him off the yard for the day and put him right back. That is asinine. That is stupid. That is not forward looking. Plus, and here's another thing. I'm waiting for this to crop up in in New York and some of these other places as they get away of this bad and evil, solitary confinement. Just think about this. So you have, just a small number, let's say, of inmates that are really super problematic. And they decide that, every time they go out there to the yard, that they're going to get into a problem with someone. And so as this goes on, and and the first day they have, one brand new enemy on their enemies list, and then two, a day or two later, and then three, and then four. And then pretty soon, we have, let's just say 15 or 20 individuals that have, 25 or 30 enemies on their list. What are we going to do with those people? Where are we going to put them? Because now, as these other inmates get spread throughout the system, now we have, 8, 10, 20 different institutions that we can't send these individuals to anymore. How are we going to even function at all if we let that continue to happen? And if we don't watch it, and I'm waiting for this to start happening, is suddenly, you've got an inmate and you have not a single unit that you can put him on that he doesn't have an enemy on. What's that going to be like? How are we going to deal with that? How are we going to deal with officers who just say, fuck it, man, I ain't coming to work no more because this guy keeps trying to stab me. So we send him somewhere else. Do you think that alleviates the problem? No. These are individuals that we have to control, and be on top of and put all kinds of pressure on and keep them under lock and key because they are dangerous to everyone. They are dangerous to the staff that work there. They are dangerous to their fellow inmates, and they are certainly dangerous to the public. And so if you take away this tool of, let's just call it administrative segregation, for lack of a better term, or security housing units, then you are going to lose control of the prisons that you do have, and you're not going to have any viable way to stop the violence. And so for all the do-gooders out there that think that they know a better way, I'm telling you, you don't. Because I know what it's like to deal with these individuals up close. They will never stop fighting with each other. They will never stop trying to kill staff. They will never stop trying to kill each other, because that's just the way that it is.
Yeah, and if you guys want to check out how hard it is to manage inmates like this, I got a book, Manage Inmate Behavior. It's available on Blue 360 Media. It's like $20, very small book. But I think I have the link in the description. But it'll tell you how we manage our system. It's a loss first gain system, and it explains the whole process. Hey, Russ, you have anything you'd like to say in closing?
No, I think that's it's a really good discussion, and just I don't know. I just really sometimes I just lose my patience with people that believe that their intentions are capable of changing outcomes, because they're not. I'm just I tell people this all the time. California is about to they've sown the wind, and they're about to reap the whirlwind. And I believe that that's also going to be the same case. I mean, we've seen this in some places in New York and elsewhere, and just this this constant belief that you can reform all of these people. It's infantile. At best, it's infantile.
Yeah, I think, guys, the reason why this becomes personal, me and Russ, is because this is something that we constantly fight. There's a misunderstanding of our practices. And I think, with the this case with Richard Allen, when you have the criminal system there and they're trying to, they're not defending what we do. They're just trying to make sure that the confession can hold weight, where if it was someone like me and Russ up there, we wouldn't let the system be attacked. We defend the system regardless of what the outcome is. We're going to defend what the practices are, because we're not going to be bastardized over someone trying to look for the department to be a scapegoat.
I got one more thing I'd like to say. Here is I am on the part of the scale now that actually does the reentry and does the rehabilitation, and that tries to get inmates or probationers to change. And we try and get them to change for the better of society. The less society has to spend on them, the less society has to fear them, the less number of times that society is victimized by them, it's better, right? And so there is nothing in me that is against, rehabilitation and reentry and doing things that make positive changes. But the part about it that I don't like is when we're foolhardy and we just believe that changes can be made no matter what, that a little bit of success in one area is an indicator of success in all areas, because it's not. This stuff, getting people to change, is so hard, and living with infantile eyes that just think that, oh, if only I tried this, I know that I could be the one to make the difference. That ego is bullshit. Yeah. And people need to come to that understanding and realize that, hey, yes, there is a place for rehabilitation and reentry and trying to change them, and then there's other times where there's just not. And so I'm fully for good, well thought out administrative segregation, security housing unit, protective housing unit, and restorative housing programs, because that's what we have to do to stay safe.
Yeah, and guys, again, this is however you want to filter it, however you need to apply it. We just do a lot of stuff out there. I think the key is solitary confinement. Let's stop. That connects to a political agenda that no longer exists. It's isolation, and we explain why we isolate. And a suicide watch is not the same as isolation to some extent. Suicide watch is a mental health concern, which I don't know how this was operated here. It is an effort to isolate, but that's a mental health watch. And the big thing is I'm wondering if he was discharged and decided to go back. So it's like, he was there for 19 months. Yeah, okay, fine. But how many times did mental health try to discharge him? I wonder if that question's being asked. And then where was the pattern after that? Oh, well, they couldn't discharge him because when they went to discharge him, he became more erratic. Wow, it looks like it's a pattern now. It looks like a pattern. It looks like every time they get close to discharging him, every few days, whatever it is, he starts acting out. And I believe that does happen a lot. I believe they coast until all of a sudden they get ready to know that they're going to be discharged, and then some of them will act out again if they're playing the game. So you got to look for those patterns. As always, guys, the show is Tear Off. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify every time I post a video. Stay safe.